Hi, I'm David with Portrait Displays, and in this video we're going to walk through calibrating the Samsung S95F QD OLED using Calman Studio, the G1 pattern source, and the C6HDR5000 colorimeter. Let's get started. I'm going to come down to the computer running Calman, and I'm going to double click on Calman Business to start the application. But while the application is starting, let's take a look at our Samsung S95F real quick. I'm going to pick up the remote and press the gear icon. And I'm going to come down to Support. I'm going to check my software update. It's always best practice before you start a calibration to make sure you're on the latest version of the software. I'm going to select Software Update. You'll notice we're already on version 1042, and that's the latest. We're going to use the back arrow and come back, and we can take another look at what the TV is. You'll notice the model code, the QN65S95F AFXZA. Now, if we want to get a little bit ahead in the calibration process here, we can press the back button, press back again, come up to Connections, and make sure you're on your network. Let's select Network, Network Status. Our TV is connected to the internet, and I can check my IP settings. You'll notice that we have an IP address of 10.240.2.58. You're going to want this later in the video, so I encourage you to write it down now. In fact, I'm going to write it down myself. Okay, with the IP address documented, I'm going to come back to the remote and press back. Press back again. And now let's come down to Expert Settings under Network. There's one more thing we're going to want to do here to make sure Calman can talk to the TV during the calibration process. I'm going to select Expert Settings, and we're going to want to navigate down to IP Remote. The IP Remote setting allows Calman to talk to the display over the network. So let's turn that on and press OK. With the IP Remote setting now on, we've confirmed our model number, our firmware, that we're on the network, we got our IP address, and the IP Remote is on so we can connect to the monitor. Let's take the remote and exit the menu. All right, with Calman running on our computer, let's come up to the top left, select Calman, come down to Open Workflow Template, Display Specific, and choose AutoCal Samsung. This will load the workflow that we want to walk through today to calibrate the Samsung display. With the workflow loaded, I have a couple options. I can select the SDR mode or the HDR mode. Let's start with the SDR mode. I'm going to select SDR and press Next. On this page of the workflow, it's time to connect to our hardware. Here, we're going to want to connect to our meter, connect to our pattern source, and connect to our display. Let's start with step 1 here and press Find Meter. Because I'm using the C6HDR5000 and I'm connected over USB to the computer running Calman, I'm going to choose all meters except those below and press Search. Calman's going to search for the probe and automatically connect. Okay, with our C6HDR5000 now connected to Calman, we can choose our meter profile. You'll notice the Asus ProArt PA32 UCDM profile happens to be loaded at the moment. I'm going to click on the profile drop-down window and I'm going to search for the profile that best matches the display. And it looks like our team has made a profile for the Samsung S95F, which happens to be what this model is, so I'm going to select that one. For more information about meter profiling and meter profiles, please click the link in the description below. Next, we're going to want to connect to our pattern source. Today, we're using the Portrait Displays G1. Let's press Find Source, select the manufacturer's Portrait Displays, select the model as the G1, and notice below Calman has already discovered the Portrait G1 on the network. I simply have to select it and press Connect. Okay, our G1 is now connected to Calman. I can also come up to the top right and look under the pattern source menu here to see all the settings. You'll notice down below that we actually have some recommended settings for the G1 when calibrating a Samsung display. You'll see on the QD OLED it says SDR 2% window with a 2-second delay, and HDR at a 2% window with a 2-second delay. Today, I'm actually going to use some different settings. We're always changing our settings to optimize it for the different displays on the market. For the S95F, I'm finding a 10% window seems to work well, and about a 1-second pattern delay works really well with the G1 here. So let's come back up to Portrait Displays G1. We're going to change the window size from full to a window 10%. We'll make sure the delay's at that 1 second. RGB 8-bit is the format. I'm going to change the output to 3840 by 2160 at 24 frames per second, typical of movie content. Going to leave range at limited SMPTE, HDR is off, and I'm ready to go. Let's come back over to our Hardware Connect page here, and now we're on step 3, which is connecting to the display. I'm going to press Find Display. And you'll notice Calman already loads the manufacturer's Samsung, and the model is at the default, which happens to be the serial 2019 4K model. I'm going to come down to IP 2025 4K. You'll notice we have models designated as IP or models designated as serial. For 2025 and newer displays, we're supporting the IP connection. So let's choose IP 2025 4K, and now we'll want to enter that IP address that I asked you to write down earlier below. So let's do that. 10.240.2.58. I'm going to enter the IP address and press connect. Now Calman is going to search for the display on the network, and you'll notice there's an IP remote prompt that comes up in the top right. We're going to want to take the remote and press allow. This is a security feature to make sure that no malicious apps try to connect to the TV and start to control it. With the Samsung S95F now connected to Calman, you'll notice there's a couple settings here on the bottom right. These are recommended settings for pattern insertion. These settings are designed to ensure stability while calibrating the display. I'm going to press enable, and this is going to load the defaults for SDR since we're calibrating the SDR signal path. If you want to change these, you're welcome to do so here. With the defaults loaded, let's now press next. We're now on the calibration target section of the workflow. This is where you can customize your targets to your specific calibration. You'll notice the defaults are a white point of D65, a color space of BT709, and an EOTF of BT1886. With the lights that are on in the room, I don't want to shift my EOTF too much, so I'm going to actually force it to a 2.4. I'm going to come over here to the EOTF, select it, choose power, and enter 2.4. I'll leave my delta E formula at delta EITP, and I'll press next. We're now at the pre-calibration capture portion of the workflow. Calman's going to put up a pattern, take a reading, and plot the data so that we have an idea of how the display was before the calibration. But here's a quick pro tip. You'll notice here in the top right that the Samsung's currently set to the movie mode. If that's the mode you want to pre-calibrate, you can start the pre-calibration process now. But if you'd like to change your mode, select the Samsung 2025 up here, bring down the display control dropdown, come over to display mode selection, click the drop-down, and you can now choose a different mode before the calibration takes place. Here, because we're connected over the network, we have options of movie and filmmaker. I'm going to choose filmmaker for the purpose of this demo. With filmmaker mode now selected, it's also indicated in the top right. Let's click off the menu and come down to the bottom right and press read series. Okay, with our pre-calibration now complete, let's take a look. We'll start with the RGB balance. Looks like our green is tracking pretty well, but we're a little high in the blue and the red, meaning we're going a little towards magenta. If we look at our delta E2000 here, we have a max error of 4 with an average of 2.5 on that grayscale. Our EOTF on the right seems to be tracking pretty nicely, but we still have that error from that magenta shift. If we come down here to the delta E2000 for the CIE, we have a max color of 3.6 with an average of 1.5. Not terrible, but we have a little room for improvement. Of note, we're pushing about 230 nits if we look at our Y max here on the bottom right, so it's also a little bright if you're trying to calibrate this for a mastering environment. Let's come down to the bottom right and press next. Now it's time to reset our display. We're already in that filmmaker mode, and I want to stay there for the purpose of this calibration tutorial, so I'm not going to change my mode, but notice that we have an option for game mode here on the bottom left. We have a couple things here. We can set game mode to auto, on, or off. If you're calibrating for game content, you may want to turn the game mode on. That's a separate calibration designed to calibrate specifically for the game content on the Samsung display. Because the G1 doesn't identify as a game console, I can leave this in auto. If you're using a pattern source that happens to identify as a game console and you want to calibrate for standard content, set this to off. We're going to leave this in auto, and let's come back up to the top right and press reset. With the Samsung now reset, let's come down to the bottom right and press next. We're now at the luminance portion of the workflow. Because we're setting the luminance pre-calibration, we typically recommend setting it about 15% higher than our end target is going to be. That's because as Calman calibrates the display, we're going to lose a little bit of luminance when we correct that white point. So today, why don't we target 100 nits because we are in Calman's studio, so we'll target a reference environment. Let's come down to Calman and press read continuous. You'll notice that the Y max is now measuring 232 nits. I can come down here to the display controls and I can either enter a value or I can use the plus or minus arrows. Let's start by entering a value of 20. With the value of 20 loaded, we're still around 190 nits, so we still need to come down quite a bit to hit that 115. I'm going to come back over to display controls and enter 10. With 10 loaded, we're at about 125.5. I'm getting really, really close. So I'm going to take my minus arrow and I'm going to toggle it down one at a time until I get to that 115. At 8, I'm at 113. I'm going to target just a little higher, so I'm going to bring this back up to 9. And with my brightness set to 9, I'm right at that 115.8. Let's come down to the bottom right, press stop, and press next. Okay, we're now at the point of the workflow where we want to calibrate the white balance. But there's a couple ways to do white balance on the Samsung display. We're going to start with a 2-point white balance. This is a very granular adjustment that's going to balance out the entire grayscale using 2 points. There's also a multi-point we're going to move on to a little later to do some fine adjustments to really get that EOTF and white balance in throughout the range of the grayscale. You'll notice here in the top left, we have 2 points already selected for 20 and 100%. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to leave these at the default, but if you want to experiment, you can of course change these. Let's come down to the bottom right, and I'm going to press AutoCal. With the AutoCal setup window now on the screen, we have our active grayscale points set to 2 point, 20, and 100, our delta E set to 0.5, press OK. Calman's now going to put up a pattern, take a reading, and adjust the 2 point. Okay, our calibration is completed successfully. It took 1 minute and 9 seconds with a total of 9 reads. Let's press OK, let's come down to the bottom right, and press Next. We're now on the grayscale AutoCal portion of the workflow. This is where we're going to do that fine tuning of the EOTF and the grayscale that I mentioned earlier. Let's come down to the bottom right and let's press AutoCal. With our AutoCal setup now open, our active grayscale points are set to SDR, which is what we want because we're calibrating SDR filmmaker mode. We're going to leave our delta E target at 0.5 and press OK. Okay, the grayscale calibration has completed. It took 14 minutes and 23 seconds with a total of 108 reads. Let's press OK. At this point, we have 2 options we can pursue. We can come down to the bottom right and press Next. That's going to take us to our verification of luminance and our post-calibration readings. Or we can come up here to the top right and press the CMS adjustment and adjust the color management system. Depending on your workflow, you're going to have to decide what's best for you. Today, let's press the CMS adjustment. This takes us to the CMS calibration page, where Calman will do an AutoCal of the color management system to achieve a better color gamut map. Let's come down to the bottom right and press AutoCal. We're going to leave our saturation set at 50%, our saturation point at 50%, and our stimulus level at 50%. Let's press OK. Okay, our CMS calibration is completed. It took 21 minutes and 15 seconds with a total of 125 reads. Let's press OK, come down to the bottom right, and press Next. We're now taken to the Verify Luminance page. Remember we talked about calibrating a little bit higher so that it falls down to where our target luminance is set to? This is where we're going to correct for that. So let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Continuous. We're targeting 100 nits today, so let's see where we ended up. We're at about 115 nits, so I'm going to come back here to the brightness, and I'm going to bring this down until I hit that 100. And we're back at 104, which is as close as we're going to get to our 100 nit target. Let's press the stop button, come down to the bottom right, and press Next. And we're now on the post-calibration capture page of the workflow. I'm going to come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, our post-calibration capture has completed. It looks like that RGB balance is tracking really nice across the board. We're matching that EOTF here on the right. Our delta E's here on delta E2000 for the grayscale has a max of 0.7 with an average of 0.4. Very, very good. We come down to our delta E2000 for the CIE, and we have a max of 1 with an average of 0.8. Our points are in those target boxes. This calibration has come out very nicely. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. We're now at calibration complete. We've calibrated the SDR filmmaker mode to BT709, 2.4 at 100 nits. I have a couple other options I can do here. I can come over to the right and I can press Additional Validation. That's going to let me take even more measurements to see how well my calibration came out. Let's take a quick look. I'm going to come down to the bottom right here on the color checker page and press Read Series. Okay, our color checker is completed. Let's take a look. If we come over to the CIE 1976 chart, we can see our measurement points are pretty much in the boxes. As we come over to the edge of the gamut, we do see a little bit of error here in yellow. What that tells me is we're a little oversaturated here on the edge. But if we look at these inner colors on the right, you're going to see that these colors are actually tracking really nicely. It's always important to prioritize the inner part of the color gamut versus the outer part of the color gamut. The inner part's where most of your colors are going to be, such as flesh tones. It's going to be very rare that we have a yellow all the way here at the edge. Now, it doesn't mean we don't want it right, but with a CMS system, we only have so many adjustments. We're typically adjusting yellow at a singular point. Therefore, this isn't a huge dramatic problem. If we come down to our delta E, we'll see these delta E values are pretty low across the board until we get to that one yellow, where that hits a 2.5 delta E2000, but our average error is 0.8. These results are very good given the multi-point and the CMS system. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. We're now on the saturation sweep portion of the workflow. So let's take another look at that yellow and let's hit Read Series. Okay, our saturation sweeps have completed. Let's have a look. If we come back down to the 1976 CIE, you notice our measurement points are hitting the targets pretty much across the board. Very, very good here. And if we look at that yellow, we're pretty much tracking all the way to that edge. Now, if we come on down to the Delta E2000 here in the bottom left, you'll notice at 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100, we're actually tracking really well. You'll start to see that error at 100 on the magenta and the yellow hit a max of 2, but again, it's very, very much at the edge of the gamut. If we come back over to the CIE, you'll see that magenta right there on the edge, right touching the edge of the box. With a CMS system, we only have so much we can prioritize, but Calman is doing a wonderful job prioritizing the colors that matter most. Let's come down to the bottom right and press next. We're now back on the calibration complete page, and we have a couple options. We've already done the additional validation, so we can either save and view the report, or we can calibrate the next mode. Today, I want to show you how to calibrate HDR, so let's hit Calibrate Next Mode, which takes us back to the welcome page. Remember, when we started the calibration, we chose SDR. I'm now going to select the calibration mode is HDR and press Next. This is going to change the steps of the workflow to optimize it for the HDR calibration process. We're once again back to the Hardware Connect page. Now we're already connected to the C6 HDR5000 and the G1 pattern source, but the G1 pattern source is currently in an SDR mode. We're going to want to change that to HDR. So I'm going to open the settings panel here on the right, and I'm going to come over to HDR and select HDR10. That's going to send an HDR signal to the display. Next, we're going to want to come down to the Samsung display. We're still connected to the Samsung display, but instead of calibrating for SDR pattern insertion, we're going to want to change that to HDR pattern insertion. And if you look, Calman's done it for you. We've already got the frequency at 15, duration at 5, and level at 25. The pattern insertion for the patches is 1, 1, and 10. If you look at the guidance on the right, we're matching right where Calman recommends. All we have to do is come down to the bottom right and press Next. And we're back on our calibration targets page. You may remember for the SDR, we were at BT709 with a power of 2.2. Now we're at a white point of D65 with BT2020 and an ST2084 EOTF curve. Calman has already made the changes to the most commonly used HDR standard. We're going to leave it right here. We're going to press Next. We're now on the pre-calibration capture page, so let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, our pre-calibration capture is completed. Let's have a look. If we come over to the RGB balance, we can see we're tracking pretty well towards the bottom end, it looks, but once we start getting up to that top end, we're going towards that magenta. If we look over at the EOTF tracking, you'll notice we're under tracking the target. We've got our target yellow line here, and we're under tracking with that gray line throughout the range. Our Delta E2000 is at 24.5 with an average of 10, and on the CIE, we're at a max 16.9 with an average of 13.1. Now, we are tracking pretty close to those target dots, but I'm assuming that the luminance error is what's causing the problem with the CIE. And we're also only at about 684 nits. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. And we're now back on the display reset page. Notice that it says Filmmaker mode, but not Filmmaker mode HDR. This is because while the G1 went into HDR mode, which put the Samsung in HDR mode, Calman hasn't been updated to also be in HDR mode. Let's select Filmmaker mode and change it to Filmmaker mode HDR. With Filmmaker mode HDR now selected, we're going to leave that game mode in auto and press Reset. Okay, with the reset completed, let's press Next. We're now back on white balance HDR. The points are now set to 30 and 80% for the 2-point. These are the recommended starting points for calibrating the 2-point for HDR. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Auto Cal. With the Auto Cal setup window now on screen, we can see our active grayscale points at 2-point, 30 and 80%, and the Delta E target of 0.5. Let's press OK. Okay, our 2-point has completed successfully. It took 48 seconds and a total of 5 reads. Let's press OK. Come down to the bottom right and press Next. Okay, and now we're on the Grayscale Auto Cal where we do the multi-point and EOTF tracking. But there's a couple things we should talk through as we perform this process. First, you're going to want to choose the model year. Currently, I'm on the 2025, so I'll select a 2025 model. Next, I'll select the corresponding model for the 2025 year. Let's come down and select the S95F, since this is an S95F. That's going to tell Calman which AutoCal points to use when it's doing the multi-point calibration. But before we start the multi-point calibration, I actually want to do a sweep and see how I'm tracking after that 2-point. But you'll notice I only have white on the screen right now. So I'm going to come up to my gear icon in the top right. I'm going to come over to my grayscale points and change white only to a 21 point. Let's select 21 point, 5% steps, 0 to 100. You'll notice those points have now populated within the workflow. We can come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, while that's running, let's take a look at why we want to do this step. I'm going to use the whiteboard, and we're going to look at Calman. We've got an EOTF chart in the top right that looks similar to this. We've got our X and Y and our target EOTF tracking all the way up. Now, we have a multi-point system with the Samsung display. That means that we have points along the EOTF that allow us to adjust. So we might have a point here, a point here, a point here, all the way to the top. These points are all we have in order to get the curve correct. But what if we're tracking down here, or we're tracking up here, right? We only have so much adjustments with these points. In fact, the Samsung has about 50 clicks this way and 50 clicks this way, but they're very, very fine adjustments. So if we're all the way out here, we might not be able to bring this all the way into alignment. But there's other settings on the Samsung display that allow us to get this closer. We can use a combination of, say, contrast and the ST2084 gamma adjustment in order to bring these close. So what I want to try and do is I want to try and get these measured lines before we perform the calibration as close to the target line as I'm able to, so that I don't have to use too much adjustment in fine-tuning it. Let's take a look how it came out in this measurement. If we look at this RGB balance, we're tracking really, really nicely until we get up to about 85% and we start to see the colors diverge. And if we come over to the EOTF chart on the right, we're tracking just a little higher than that target yellow line all the way throughout. Now remember, we only have so much adjustment in order to correct this. So I want to make sure I get this as close as I can before I start the AutoCal. So if I'm looking at these colors at the top and I'm looking at this curve right here, I'm thinking I probably have to take my contrast down just a couple clicks to try and improve this and get this just a little closer before that AutoCal. Let's come up to the DDC controls here in the top right. Here, you'll find all the display controls Calman has for the Samsung. As we scroll down, you'll see we have adjustments for brightness, shadow detail, contrast. We come down lower and we can see the color tone at R gain, G gain, and B gain. The AutoCal has taken the red gain down to -2 and the blue gain down to -3 while not touching the offsets. If we come down further, you'll see we have the gamma set to ST24 and the gamma is at 0. HDR tone mapping is at static and our peak brightness is in high. At this point, I'm going to take the contrast down to about 48. This is going to take down a little bit of that clipping and I think improve that color fringing right at the top. Let's do that and take another sweep. I'm going to come over here to the top left and press plus next to History 1. This will open up a History 2. What this lets me do is take another set of measurements where I can go back and compare them to History 1. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, our measurement's completed, let's have a look. If we look here in the RGB balance, it doesn't look like we've improved the color fringing. But if we take a look at this EOTF, it does look like we're starting to track this a little bit better. You can see this gray is now lining up with that yellow here. We've got some error in the middle, and we're lining up a little bit better here at the top. Let's switch back to History 1 and take a quick look at that. If we go to History 1, we can see that we were much higher before, and now we're tracking a lot closer. So now I'm going to want to focus on improving the color balance at the top end of the scale. The reason for that is I don't think I'm going to have enough range in order to improve it with the multi-point. So I'm going to try and even out my error. I'm going to try and improve the top end while probably throwing out the bottom end just a little bit, but that bottom end will then get fixed with the multi-point. So let's come back over to the DDC and let's come down to the red gain, green gain, and blue gain. Again, we know that the red and the blue are a little bit high and green is tracking really nicely with that EOTF. So I'm going to take the red gain down and the blue gain down to about -5 and -5. Let's do another reading by coming down to the bottom right and pressing Read Series. Okay, our measurement's completed again. Let's have another look. If we come back over to the RGB balance chart, we're tracking really nicely, but you'll start to see around that 50-55%, we're starting to go a little bit low on that blue. But as we get up to that 80-85% here, we are getting that top end a lot closer together, which means we're improving that top end. If we come over to the EOTF chart, we're still tracking pretty good near black, then we come a little above it, we come back in, we come back above it, and we're tracking really nicely all the way up. So it looks like we're improving this. We've now got a Delta E2000 with a max 2.8, down from that 5. Let's switch back to History 1 and take another toggle. History 1, and there you go. You've got the green a little bit low at that top end, you've got the EOTF high, so we're getting much closer and our max is at 5.3. So we've definitely improved this even with these few little adjustments. But what I want to do now is I want to run the AutoCal. This doesn't mean the AutoCal is going to be perfect, but it does mean that we should be in a much better place for the AutoCal to achieve its goal. You may find after performing the AutoCal that you still want to tweak that gain or that contrast just a little bit to make sure you're in the range across the entire EOTF. This can be an iterative process that may take 1 or 2 cycles to complete to your satisfaction. Let's see where we get it. Let's come down to the bottom right and press AutoCal. Calman's already selected the proper active grayscale points because you've put your model in at the top of the workflow page. We'll leave our delta E target at 0.5 and let's press OK. Calman's going to run through the process. We're going to take a look at the results at the end. If Calman has run out of range, you might want to make some tweaks and rerun the process. It may take 1 or 2 times before you get it just right. Let's see how it comes out. Okay, our grayscale calibration has completed successfully. Time elapsed 28 minutes and 19 seconds, and it took a total of 200 reads. Let's press OK and have a look. So if we look at the grayscale, we can see we're tracking really nice all the way up to the very top where we have just a little bit of color fringing. We can see that 100 here on the delta E is still at a 2.6, so it's not quite being corrected. If I come over here to the DDC in the top right and click on it, we can arrow over to the RGB adjust. Here, we can see if we're going too far in either direction. If we look from 75.3 all the way down to 24.7, you'll notice nothing's all the way down or all the way up. We're right in the middle. That means we're in a pretty good spot now with our contrast and our ST28A4 tracking. But where we're not quite getting it right is that peak white. So I really want to get that peak white just a little bit better. Let's, for the purpose of this tutorial, take one more stab at it. I'm going to press Reset Grayscale, and that's going to reset the RGB adjustments we just did. With those RGB adjustments now reset, you can see everything's at 0. Let's come back to our workflow and take a look at that error at the top end. I'm going to scroll across my data set on the bottom all the way to 100%. If I look, I'm really not that far off. I have an X and Y of 0.313 and 0.326. We just need just a little more green. So we're going to come back up to the DDC controls and arrow back over to the display controls. With the display controls now open, I can come down to my red gain and my blue gain. Let me pull that down one more click. Let me measure that 100% white and see where we end up. We've come in just a little bit better. We're at 0.3135, 0.3276, just with that one adjustment. Let's see if we can get this just a little bit closer. We just need a little more green. So I'm going to come back up to the DDC. I'm going to remove some blue, which is going to add a little green, take out a little red, and measure again. Okay, that came in really nicely. We now have a max error of 0.5 and that 100 came down. If we take a look at the XY, we're at 0.3125, 0.3285, right where we want to be. You'll also notice we're at about 2100 nits at a 10% window. But I want to take a closer look at this. Let's come back up to the top left, hit that plus button to open a History 3. We're also going to want to come back to that gear icon and measure a few more points near that white. So we'll come over to the grayscale points and toggle these. I'll go to 23.5 and back to 21. This is going to reset the points from the AutoCal points back to the points I want to measure for the purpose of this demo. Now I have a 21-point grayscale that goes all the way up to 100. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, our measurement has completed. Let's have a look. If I come over to the RGB chart, you'll see we're tracking that grayscale really nice, all the way up to about 50% where we see that divergence. But then we come back in around 85% and we're tracking all the way up to 100 now. That looks really nice. I think we're going to have enough range to correct it based on what we were seeing from before. If we come over to the EOTF chart, you'll see we're still tracking right around that yellow target line. So we don't have a lot of improvement to do here. Let's come down to the bottom right and press that AutoCal button again and run the AutoCal a second time. Let's press OK, and Calman will take care of the rest. Okay, our calibration is completed successfully. It took 20 minutes and 43 seconds and a total of 147 reads. Let's press OK and take a look. All right, our grayscale looks like it's tracking really flat across right now, and our EOTF is tracking really nicely. We'll also see our delta E max is now 8.4. So we had enough range to correct this all the way throughout the EOTF. Let's take a look at those DDC settings. I'm going to click on DDC and arrow over to the RGB adjustment. Looking at the red, green, and blue here, nothing seems to be pinned either too low or too high. We're right in the middle of that range across the board, which means we're in a really great spot right now where we're not torquing on something too much to get the results that we were trying to get. Let's click off the DDC menu. And now, once again, we have two ways we can go. We can do a CMS adjustment, or we can simply go to our post-calibration. Let's click on CMS and see how that comes out. On the CMS calibration page, let's come down to the bottom right and press Auto Cal. We're going to leave the saturation set, saturation point, and stimulus level all at 50 and press OK. Okay, the calibration is completed. Let's take a look. It took 30 minutes and 9 seconds and a total of 158 reads. Let's press OK. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. Okay, we're now on the post-calibration capture. Let's see how everything came out. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, our post-calibration capture is completed. Let's have a look. Looks like we're tracking our grayscale really nicely all the way through that RGB balance. We have a little divergence here, could be from some heating and cooling during the calibration process. We have a max delta E of 1.4 with an average of 0.6. We're tracking that EOTF really nice here. We can see a little lift down here. So we're probably having a little bit of heating cooling issue. Could be a little bit from the lights that are in the room as well, but we're tracking really nicely all the way up that PQ curve. As we come down to the bottom right, you'll see we're doing 2,145 nits, quite a bright display. And on our CIE delta E, we have a max of 2.1 with an average of 0.5, and our measurement points are pretty close to those target boxes. It is important to keep in mind that we are measuring in high dynamic range, which is a pretty large color volume here, and we're only measuring a couple points. Why don't we hit the next button and do a little bit of that additional validation real quick. We're going to press next, hit the additional validation, and come down to the right and hit Read Series here on the color checker. Okay, the color checker is completed. Let's have a look. Looks like we have a max here of about 3.5 with an average of 1.3. All these delta E's are pretty low across the board. If we look at our CIE chart here, our measurement points are tracking pretty close to those boxes. Let's press next, and let's hit Read Series here on the saturation sweeps. Okay, our saturation sweeps have completed. Let's have a look. If we come down here to the delta E 2000, we've got a max of 2.6 and an average of 1.5. Very good across the board. If we look at the CIE here on the right, you can see that the measurement points are tracking along the targets. Very good for high dynamic range. There you have it. We've calibrated the Samsung S95F using Calman Studio, the C6HDR5000 colorimeter, and the G1 pattern source. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.